vibhuva bharavahantarakam Vande rupa sanatana bhujagam Sri Jiva Goswami Sri Gauranga Gunanandana Vidho Sadhyasanidharnitam Papatrapanikrintanam Sanamitam Govinda Gana Amritayi Sri Gauranga Gunanandana Vidho Sadhyasanidharnitam Papatrapanikrintanam Sanamitam Govindagana-amritayi Anandambudhivarthanayi Kanipanam Kaivalyaniswarakam Vande Rupa Sanatana Bhujagam Sri Jiva Goswami Krishna Kirtana Ganana Tana Param Premamritam Panidhi Takvato Namase Samannalapati Sani Sadatu Chama Bhuttvadina Ganesakaru Karanaya Kopina Kanthasitau Krishna Kirtana Ganana Tana Pano Premamritam
Kumagyanatmirandasya Jnana-Salakaya Chakshurun militam yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Adunulambito Bujo Kanakavadatu Sankirtanaya Kapitaro Kamalaya Taksho Vishwambaro Dvijabaro Yugadharma Palo Vande Jagat Priyakaro Karunavataro Vande Shri Krishna Chaitanya Nityananda Sahodito Gurudai Pushpavanto Chitra Sangdo Tamuno Vandeham Shri Ramakrishna Abhayo Charano Sako Sukado Paramanando Sundaro Subalapriyo He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostuje Tapta Kanchana Gurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye.
Glorious devotees, Shri Gaudiya Vaishnav Guru Parampara Ki Jai, Shri Jiva Goswami Ki Jai, Śaṭ Sandarbhas Ki Jai, Anantakota Vaishnav Vrindi Ki Jai. So we're going to continue with our discussion of Shri Jiva Goswami's Śaṭ Sandarbhas. We're still laying the groundwork based on the Tattva Sandarbha, which is basically the first of the six Sandarbhas, and it provides an introduction to the entire Sandarbha presentation. And we left off in our last discussion with the Mangalacharna verses. And we had got up to the qualifications of the student. And we discussed to some extent the fact that we have to kind of check our ego at the door, even if you're coming from a devotional attitude and you are striving to become Lord Krishna's devotee. Of course, what this means is we have to be willing to leave our egoic preconceived conceptions aside in order to dive deeply into a wholehearted hearing of the Sandarbhas as Sri Jiva Goswami is presenting them. So and if we're coming to the Sandarbhas simply from a state of inquiring into what is this great literary contribution of a spiritual personality putting forth the ideas of a sampradaya in Indian lineage, for such scholars, if they want to really attain anything of merit out of their hearing and reading of the Sandarbhas, they need to also make a full-hearted plunge, free of any preconceived notion. In other words, they have to have a true interest in what's being presented here. So both for the Vaishnava community and also for those that are simply inquiring for a first time due to some intellectual interest, this taking deeply what's going to be presented is going to be key to understanding what Jiva Goswami is offering on behalf of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Gaudiya Vaishnava Guru Parampara. So that was the 7th Anucheta, and we will continue again, just an overview with the Tattva Sandarbha, which is an introduction to the whole presentation. It can be, the Tattva Sandarbha itself can be broken up into 3 basic areas. The first is, of course, the invocation, which is the Mangalacharna, which comprises of verses in praise of the of one spiritual master. It also comprises of benedictions, blessings to those that are taking up the process of inquiry through the literature. And also it presents the presentation, what's going to be put forth in a particular book or presentation. So the Mangalacharna has these 3 parts. And then from the Mangalacharna, we also go to what is the essence of the Tattva Sandarbha. And the Tattva Sandarbha gives us 2 primary focuses. How do we attain reliable knowledge regarding spirituality, commonly known as epistemology. We also refer to it through the Sanskrit term praman. What are the sources of knowledge that we put our inquiries into? And then the book concludes with what is knowable, prameya, the ontology. So once we know how we can acquire reliable knowledge, then the next step is well, what are we inquiring about? So leaving off where we did with the Mangalacharna putting forth the qualification of the student, we'll go on from there. I wanted to share one verse regarding the four elements of any literature, according to knowledgeable presentations. So let's take a look at a slide here in that regard. And this is the four essential elements of a book. Anubandha Chatustaya. In the beginning of an educational text, four elements must certainly be enumerated, like the criteria of eligibility for study of the book, adhikari, and that we've discussed a little bit as the verse was put forth in the Mangalacharna regarding eligibility. The relation between the book as signifier of its subject and the subject itself as the signified, sambandha. So that makes perfect sense. The book is going to signify something no matter what its subject is. And then what is the subject? How is it going to do that? So what is the relation between the book, what it's speaking about? And then the subject to be known through the investigative inquiry, visaya or abhideya. What's the goal of inquiry through the agency of the literature? And the book's purpose, prayojan, the value to be actualized by the reader, inquirer through assimilation of the teaching. What are you going to get out of it? Unless there's something of value, why would we take time in any course of inquiry? Of course, there's recreational reading of many books, but here we're speaking about a literature that's meant to give us some true insight into a subject matter which we have interest in. So where we left off, this book may be studied only by one whose sole aspiration is to worship the lotus feet of Sri Krishna. All others are forewarned as to the implications of this investigation. And really the forewarning, what is the forewarning? If you're not going to make an inquiry free of any preconceived notions or free of any overriding bias from prior what do we want to say, stands that you've taken on a particular subject, unless you're going to be open and in the inquiry, you're not going to be fully satisfied. I believe it is Jiva Goswami himself that points out that there are different kinds of discussions. And one of the discussions is which is an open-hearted discussion where everyone's looking to attain further enlightenment. And then there's other discussions where the bias is so much that one of the speakers or one of the presenters or even the inquirer, he wants to make his position foremost, and he wants to win at all costs. So inquiry, Jiva's saying here, I'm interested in Vada discussion here. If you're interested, then this book will give you some real value in your spiritual inquiry into the nature of the Supreme, and specifically Lord Krishna, and leave the ego at the door, leave the ego aside. So he goes on in his Mangala Charna, and we'll just go through these quickly. The seventh Anucheta. After offering obeisances to my initiating guru and to those spiritual teachers who taught me the meaning of Srimad Bhagavatam, I wish to write this book called Sri Bhagavat Sandarbha. So again, what's the subject of the book? The subject of the book is Lord Krishna, and the Bhagavat Sandarbha is about the utilization of the Bhagavat Purana, Srimad Bhagavatam, as the main means of spiritual revelation when it comes to finding out the nature of our being and the nature of the Supreme Being and everything in between. So this brings us to his next Anucheta, which is the last Anucheta of the Mangala Charna. And this is giving what is to be put forth. What is the purpose of the book? What are we going to discuss in this presentation? In one feature, Sri Krishna as pure consciousness without any manifest characteristics. And I'm sorry, misread that. In one feature, Sri Krishna exists as pure consciousness without any manifest characteristic and is referred to as Brahman in some portions of the Vedas. In another feature, he expands as the Purusha who regulates the extrinsic potency, Maya, by his many plenary portions. In yet another of his principal forms, he is Narayan, resplendent in the spiritual sky by Kuntha. May that Sri Krishna, the original complete absolute truth, Swayam Bhagavan, bestow love for himself on those who worship his lotus feet in this world. So this verse contains the seed conception of the major ideas, the thesis that's going to be unpacked and completely elaborated on in the Sandarbhas. And we notice a great similarity between this verse. If we look, we'll find here's the source of this material coming from the Bhagavat, the Vedanta verse. Brahmeti Paramatmeti Bhagavaniti Sabjate. The great inquirers into the absolute truth have perceived that absolute truth variously according to their angles of vision. Some are seeing the absolute truth as complete as Brahman, Brahmeti, some as Paramatma, Paramatmeti, and some as Bhagavan, Bhagavaniti, Sabjate. So they know the absolute truth in these different ways according to the methodology that they employ in their spiritual pursuit. Let me see where we are here. So this one verse, I just want to do an overview here. Today in this class, there's going to be a lot of reading. I'm going to share a lot of the introduction to the epistemology, the nature of properly approaching the Sandarbhas and acquiring an appreciation for the methodology of acquiring realization through the utilization of Sri Jiva Goswami's Śaṭ Sandarbhas. What is he basing his presentation on, and how free of any egoic approach can we truly enter into the heart of it and get the most out of it? So we find in the first 4 Sandarbhas, which deal with Sambandha Gyan, that there are 2 primary verses from the Srimad Bhagavatam that comprise the basis for the Sambandha Gyan. And the first we just went over, Varanti tat vavidas tatvam jnanamadvayam Rameti paramatmeti bhagavaniti subjite, that the absolute truth is viewed differently by different people that are seeking out knowledge of the absolute truth and realization of the same. And the second verse is, if we're going to really look to the topmost conception of that absolute truth, the true key is here in the very first canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. This is the Parivas Sutra. This is the shining lamp by which everything in the Bhagavat Purana needs to be seen. So if we see someplace else in the Bhagavat Purana, and Jiva will go on in his introduction in the Tattva Sandarbha to point out that the Bhagavat Purana is the light that lights up all the other literatures. So the light of scripture that lights up all other scriptures is Srimad Bhagavatam, the Bhagavat Purana. And the inner light of the Bhagavat Purana is these few syllables, Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. If we hear anything in another scripture that is not lit up with the overall conception put forth in the Bhagavat Purana, which Jiva Goswami is going to completely school us in, then we have to say, well, that whatever was presented there needs to be seen in the light of Srimad Bhagavatam. This is the conception. This is what the author himself, Srila Vyasadeva, wrote as his mature commentary on all the literature, the spiritual insights that he gave to humanity, whether they came in the 4 Vedas, whether they came in the 5th Veda, the Mahabharata, and the other Puranas. Everything there was completely illuminated through his revelation, which he gave to us in the form of the Bhagavat Purana after taking shelter of his spiritual master's instruction. As you know, he felt some despondency. He'd given everything to the world that he could in these literatures, but still just didn't feel quite right. And therefore, he met with Narada. He entered into Samadhi. The Bhagavat Purana is called a Samadhi Bhashya. It is an explanation of his spiritual revelation in Samadhi, where he directly had experience of Bhagavan Sri Krishna, Swayam Bhagavan, the topmost manifestation of the Supreme Lord. So this inner heart of the Bhagavatam, just for one more idea, we'll find there's various Puranas written for various members of human society under various levels of the influence of the modes. And sometimes a Purana will say, Lord Shiva is the supreme personality. Well, okay, so this is a scripture, the Shiva Purana or whatever Purana may put forth such a statement. It's still Shastra, so therefore do we accept it? Yes, we accept it, but we accept it utilizing the light of the Bhagavat Purana, and specifically the inner light of the heart of the Bhagavat Purana, this Parivas Sutra, Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. So now we come to the beginning of the actual, the Mangalacharna is now completed, and Jiva Goswami is continuing with the necessity of the epistemological validity for our inquiry. We need to why and how do we approach, and what do the Sandarbhas have to offer? So in the first half of this Anucheta, ninth Anucheta, we're now entering into the second subject of the book, epistemology, praman. What is the evidence that the book's going to use in order to establish what? Its subject, the object of the book, the praman. So he says there, 4 topics were suggested in the verse from the previous Anucheta. Sri Krishna is the subject, Visaya, of the book, and the book's relation, sambandha, to him is that of signifier, vachaka, to the signified, vacha. Devotional turning of all the facilities to him, bhajan, is what is meant to be enacted in all circumstances. That which is to be done, or the duty, also known as abhideya. And unconditional love for him is the ultimate completion of such devotional turning of consciousness, prayojan. Now, in order to investigate these 4 topics, we should first determine a means of valid knowing, praman, by which these topics can be ascertained. So I am now going to go and share with you a few pages in regards to this epistemology of the Bhagavat Purana, which to me, more than anything I've read of late, highlight and the nature of true spiritual inquiry. They're eloquently written, and what comes to mind is, if you recall the conversation between Ramananda Roy and Sri Chaitanya. In the beginning, Sri Chaitanya, no matter what Ramananda Roy presented and the scriptural evidence he gave, as requested by Lord Chaitanya to support it, Lord Chaitanya said, that's external. Please go on. Something more. No, that's external. And finally, he came to a place where he no longer said that it was an external. When he was saying, Lord, it's external, meaning this is more or less an external religious viewpoint. This is covered by some other motivation. And then he came to this line where Ramananda Roy replied, Rai kahe, Jnana-Sunya-Bhakti, Sajjasara. Ramananda Roy replied, devotional service independent of mundane logic and empiric philosophy. This is the essence of the perfection of life. Here, Lord Chaitanya's, he no longer said external. He now accepted, oh, now we're getting somewhere. We're setting aside mundane logic. We're setting aside empiric philosophy, and we can enter into the heart of what is devotion. And as you know from that important conversation, then Ramananda Roy finally leads Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu into the various loving relationships that the living entity can have with the supreme absolute truth. So this is significant. And this is where Jiva Goswami begins to school us in what is the inquiry of the Sandarbhas, that we need to set aside this gyan, an approach to spirituality which is not based on a wholehearted turning of consciousness, as he been said. So there are quite a few slides that I hope I'm going to read, and I want you to read along with me, and we'll discuss a little after each one, but I think you'll see, and it's kind of hard. We always hear it's so hard to express the spiritual ideas properly in English. And we know that Guru Maharaj is so expert, and others, it's a real talent. It takes some real skill to express in the English language the heart of spirituality that the sadhus have to share with us. So here is such an example of that heart sharing in an English language that should be of great benefit to us, just reading the flow of the words and how it's presented. So the topic of epistemology is indispensable to an investigation of truth. In other words, if you're looking for truth, you need to have a basis for putting your faith in what you're hearing. So somebody's got to be able to convince you that what they're putting forth is reliable. Otherwise, why would you want to take your time to hear from them? For how can we claim to know anything in truth if our means of knowing it be flawed or uncertain? It would remain at best an approximation subject to further review. So before embarking on a deliberation of the core truths of Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojan, it is critical that a valid praman, or means of valid knowing, be ascertained. At the time of Jiva Goswami's writing, the orthodox schools of Indian philosophy, darshans, based their metaphysics primarily on the authority of the Vedas, considering them to be divine sound revelation, Shruti or Sabda. So the subject of epistemology comes to focus solely on the discussion of a scriptural line of authority stemming from the Vedas. Jiva Goswami extends the discussion a step further by logically and spiritually propounding Srimad Bhagavatam as the definitive portion of the fifth Veda, which reveals the inner meaning of the Vedas. Apparently, on this foundation alone, the epistemological inquiry is determined to be complete. What's being said here is, at the time of the presentation of this school of spirituality in that social setting, the Indian philosophies, the darshans, were based on the metaphysics of the Vedas. And there are various schools of thought that looked at the Vedas and used them as their basis. And if they're orthodox, if they're theistic, there are different ones, but of all those, the Vedic school is the most appreciated in that social setting of the day. And then, as I said in the last discussion, along comes Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and turns the current thoughts of the day gradually on their head. Before the advent of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, even though Srila Vyasadeva had presented the Bhagavat Purana 500 years prior, 5,000 years prior, after Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Sri Krishna had departed, still the methodology for putting forth a school of spiritual thought was based upon the threefold highway, Prasthanatrayi. Basically, the different schools of thought based their metaphysic on the founders' commentaries, primarily on the Vedanta Sutra, the essence of all the Vedas, in sutra form, Bhagavad Gita, and the 10 principal Upanishads. And along comes Sri Chaitanya, and he introduces his school of thought, and he puts forth through his disciples, through his instructions to them, that the Bhagavat Purana is the topmost Purana. Let's just look, it just makes sense. The Bhagavat Purana was given to us after the mature spiritual revelation of the author of all the Vedas, Srila Vyasadeva himself. It's his topmost contribution because it is his mature commentary. Let us go on. But if this is the case, then of what relevance can such an apparent epistemological reduction be to the disciplines of modern philosophy, psychology, phenomenology, I don't know if I'm saying that right, phenomenology, conscious study, quantum physics, and so on? Indeed, of what relevance is it for any modern reader? Inquire outside of an insular group of believers. The answer to these questions will lead us into deeper epistemological evaluation. It's a good point. Who would want to read this book that's based on these old books and soul, and the sole focus is one Purana coming out of India? Come on, there's so much thought in the world. Why would we want to go there to seek out the ultimate in truth? The ultimate in the truth regarding psychology, regarding regarding consciousness. Why go there? It doesn't seem to make any sense. This introduction continues. First of all, looking beyond the apparent reduction. In other words, Jiva Goswami, the Gaudiya Vaishnavas, they're taking a reductionist viewpoint and saying everything's in this one book. This one book can give you everything. But looking beyond the apparent reduction, one that would seemingly require a trans-empirical leap of faith, a more profound and certain means of knowing is implied in the concept of revealed sound. Oh, there's something more here than just a literary book. It's revealed sound, sabda. Oh, what's that mean? Other pramans, such as perception and inference, which are the primary ways of acquiring knowledge in this world of man, what we see with our senses and what we come away with and how we think about what we perceived, gives us inferences based on 100 different lines of thought, are possible means. Other pramans, such as perception and inference, are possible means of valid knowing within the range of operations that define their respective limits, effectively the quantifiable and the thinkable. Sabda, on the other hand, signifies a supercognitive sound potency or logos that is transhuman, a paruseya, beyond human sound, and thus beyond the limitations of language and thought, that is self-existing and self-revealing, swayam prakash, and thus trans-empirical, and that is disclosed to consciousness directly, saksad upalabdha, without mediation through any other conditional mode of knowing. I could melt into these words. They're so revealing. Understood in this sense, sabda implies an innate potency of primordial consciousness itself, the supreme conscious foundation and source. It not only signifies reality in the manner of conceptual logical formulation, but is identical with that reality. I mean, this is revolutionary, what's being said here. This sabda is something beyond any form of acquiring of knowledge that we're accustomed to in our conditional lives. The sound vibration itself has its own agenda, as Guru Maharaj says. It has its own, it goes beyond anything that we're accustomed to. Reality in the manner or conceptual or logical formulation, but is identical with that reality. It is thus one specific reality potency through which consciousness discloses itself. So sabda points to an epistemological mode of knowing that transcends perception and inference. This mode of knowing does not so much involve an effort or intent to know any sort of object, internal or external, or the part of a subject. Rather, it is an interning of consciousness toward its own source prior to any conditional subject-object divide. What is this saying? This is itself Jnana-Sunya-Bhakti. Bhakti beyond a gyan point of reference, but it's gyan in the highest sense of the term itself. So by its own self-revelatory power, sabda, which effectuates the turning of consciousness, becomes identical with such turning. It may thus be understood as knowledge through conscious identity and not conceptual knowledge about. That's an important concept. It's not knowledge about, it's knowledge through revelation. Our conscious identity, our turning of consciousness towards the subject is beyond simply an acquisition of knowledge, an outgoing acquisition of knowledge. It's a revelation of knowledge. That is Sabda Brahman. The existence of such a direct mode of knowing has been the common experience reported by realized mystics of all traditions throughout recorded history. This adds weight to the argument that this mode of knowing cannot be reduced merely to a subjective experience of a limited knower or a limited tradition, if we could go so far as to say, or a limited sect, or limiting in any way. No, spirituality is, this is coming from a different plane altogether. Of course, there's specificity that's coming, but that's further down the path of spiritual revelation based on the heart of the inquirer as they proceed. This adds weight to the argument that this mode of knowledge cannot be reduced merely to the subjective experience of a limited knower. Rather, it has been recognized by those who have known it as primordial subjectivity itself prior to identification or involvement with any conditional knower and known. I'll continue, if you allow. It must be noted, however, that for its higher epistemological capacity to be activated, one must rise above belief and disbelief. Whoa, wait a minute. I mean, off the charts, off the intellectual map, I have to leave my beliefs and disbeliefs at the door. I have to leave everything if I really want to enter into this and have it activate my inner consciousness and let me experience something beyond the world I inhabit. I have to leave that also at the door. In the true sense of the term, belief can have application only when reality is not directly known through identity and pure consciousness. You can use your belief when you haven't yet had realization. It's the beginning. Adao, Shraddha, Tata Sadhu, Sangotha Bhajana Kriya. We do begin on faith. We hear and we develop some faith. But here we're talking about entering into the mysteries of spirituality, and something much deeper is being revealed. So when we don't have that direct knowledge, only when that reality is not directly known through identity and pure consciousness, only when the believing subject is the phenomenal self identified with perceptions, cognitions, effects, and conation. For the conventional practitioner or worshiper, however, dedicated, devotion is enacted still from the separate self-sense, prithak bhava, of a conditional subject trying to know some ultimate object through willful efforts of the mind and body. That's called sadhana bhakti. There's some effort involved. Sometimes it's some very extreme efforts. Give this up, give that up. Only here, only act this way, get up early, chant this number of rounds, on it goes. It's like, oh my gosh, am I ever going to get there? But it's useful. It starts us. It's putting us on the path in the right direction. But what's being spoken of here is the reality to be perceived in our own inner consciousness. And we get glimpses of that along the path. And it leads us to absorption in this methodology of thinking that's being revealed here, that Jiva's opening the door for us here. Now, let's take a look at how to utilize this Bhagavat Purana to the utmost capacity so that we can truly enter into what it has to offer. And what is it? It is the topmost rasic shastra. It doesn't get better than the Bhagavat Purana. And as I said in our last discussion, from that Purana, so many, from the son of the Bhagavat Purana, what's coming? So many flares of spiritual insight in so many other literatures coming from those who are having a direct contact with this spiritual revelation. For such a person, Sabda then, even though believed in as divine revelation, is reduced to a level of knowledge about reality. It can just as easily be disbelieved because it is unknowable and hence unprovable through logic and perception. What is that stage? We want to get to this stage of nishta, ruchi, asakti, these upper stages of sadhana bhakti practice will get us beyond the possibility of it can be just as easily be disbelieved. Because in the beginning, sometimes we run hot, sometimes we run cold. Go to Vishwanath's Madhurya Kadambini, all these different stages of practice where our prior conditioning is having an effect on our current practice, and it's pulling us here and there, this way and that way. Sometimes running hot, sometimes running cold, sometimes thinking this is the solution to my spiritual life. No, this is solution. Let me become a renunciate. No, let me become a householder and get it out of my system. So again, we could go back to that very concise directive by Vishwanath in Madhurya Kadambini. It must be known directly in consciousness, which is to say that by the turning of consciousness upon its source, Sabda is enabled to self-manifest the reality with which it is identical. This Bhagavat Purana is Krishna incarnate, Krishna's manifest. He no longer was manifest in human society, and he moved into the Bhagavat Purana. And there the ras could be had, the taste for his association could be fully quenched by those coming later. What is suggested here for epistemological consideration is merely the allowance for the possibility of such a phenomenal mode of knowing. For its actual existence can be known for certain only by one in whom it is awakened. Okay, just give me a chance, is what the book's saying, the Sandarbhas. Give me a chance. Just make a sincere inquiry, leave your ego at the door, and something may awaken that's beyond your world of sensuality, the world. The possibility is there. Entertain the possibility, and then that is the qualification for entrance into a study of the Bhagavat. The elaboration of the entire process is intended precisely to actualize this possibility. Therefore, sabda as praman implies far more than mere belief in spiritual authority. It refers rather to the direct of a person transcending the instruments. Thus, sabda entails a superior grade of direct perception conveyed in linguistic form for the cognition of one who is eligible and available to such an experience. Can we just put ourselves there? Then the possibility is open. The reader is invited to rise beyond belief and disbelief and the source of both, which is egoic identification. We're invited to know reality immediately, apprehending it in perfect identity with the mode of knowing of the Bhagavat's original speaker and author. When received in this way, sabda becomes not epistemological reduction, but epistemological transmutation and expansion. He concludes this Anucheta, the second part of the Anucheta. In this regard, just to remind you where you're coming from, in this regard, perception, inference, and other such methods are deficient because human beings are prone to four defects. Why would you want to rely on anything but sabda? Look at what you're at a disadvantage out of the gate if you want to take another approach to acquiring knowledge, what to speak of spiritual knowledge, what to speak of entering into the world of revelation. We're subject to delusion. We make mistakes. We're liable to misrepresentational biases. That's cheating. And our senses are limited in functional capacity. Furthermore, these methods of acquiring knowledge are not at all suited to approach the transcendental entity, whose nature is inherently inconceivable and beyond phenomenality. So that gives us a little introduction into the epistemology of that's going to be employed. What is the basis of the knowing that's utilized by Jiva Goswami? And he'll go on in setting the foundation in this Śaṭ Sandarbha for the giving validity to the Bhagavat Purana as being the primary Purana, the primary source for spiritual inquiry. And we'll touch upon that in the next class. And move on to what's knowable, Lord Sri Krishna, and then we'll go on to some overview of the Bhagavat Purana, the Bhagavat Sandarbha, Paramatma Sandarbha, and we'll bring us to the feet of the Krishna Sandarbha, where we'll do a little more in-depth exploration, as we've been requested to do so in this series of lectures. So if anyone has a question, there's a minute left. You can unmute yourself. I think I can hear you with these. And if there is no question, I'll assume that I'll thank you so much for your association and hope that you return to more of these presentations. It's a great privilege to do this on behalf of Sri Chaitanya Sangha.
Dulal, Prabhu.
Yes.
Mitra wants to know what epistemology means.
It's the basis, the historical basis for any knowledge. So epistemology is the study of and presentation of that basis upon which a school of knowledge put forth. Does that make sense?
He said no. Did you say no?
Sort of.
You said sort of.
Okay, well.
This is a term a lot.
He said that you use the term a lot, so he kind of wanted to, yeah.
Epistemology is where, like, let's take, for example, what we're speaking about here is the epistemology of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. What we have a school of knowledge. So what do we base that knowledge upon? So that's the epistemological basis. Epistemology is, what is the basis? What are you basing your knowledge upon? And that's what the term refers to. Like, you may go to a university and they would set up they would put forth different schools of knowledge in a university. So in those different schools, they would have sources that they would rely upon as viable, as reliable, as conclusive, and that would set their school apart. All right, so it would distinguish. So what distinguishes your understanding? What is your school of thought based upon? That's the epistemology. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, this will start to feedback if I bring it in here. Are we good?
No.
Oh, hey. So kind of the philosophical structural framework and the history that led to our understanding.
Yes, and what's so significant about Gaudiya Vaishnavism is it's a school of thought. It's that the purpose of it is to attain spiritual insight, understanding, resulting in revelation. So prior schools of Vaishnava thought, theistic schools of Vaishnava thought, were based upon the Vedas, of course. But their approach to the Vedas was based on, as we spoke, the Prasthanatrayi, which was the primary teacher within that school of thought, which we call a sampradaya, would put forth the commentary on Bhagavad Gita, the Vedanta Sutra, and he would comment on the principal Upanishads. So that was the Prasthanatrayi. So if you go to the Ramanuja Sampradaya, the Madhva Sampradaya, the Ballava Sampradaya, the Mbarkas, all of them gave commentaries primarily on Vedanta Sutra. And along comes Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and he says, why are they relying on this approach of Bhagavad Gita? The author himself, Srila Vyasadeva, wrote the most comprehensive commentary on everything that he'd put forth to human society, and he presented it when he rewrote the Srimad Bhagavatam under the direction of Narada after he had a revelation. He entered into samadhi and he had experience of Krishna directly. Then he came back out and he wrote us the Srimad Bhagavatam. So Sri Chaitanya, when he advented, he put forth the Srimad Bhagavatam as the primary praman for our Vaishnava school of thought. It turned everything up on its head. For hundreds of years, it's always been the Vedanta Sutra commentary of an acharya and the Gita commentary. So all these other major schools, of spiritual thought based upon the Vedas were all of a sudden confronted with, well, here's this new sect of Vaishnavas, and they're not accepting the standard. Well, they must not be bona fide. So therefore, Lord Chaitanya instructed his disciples, the Goswamis, make my religion bona fide. Give it some, go out, sit right, and make Gaudiya Vaishnavism, which is based upon a personal relationship with Krishna, make it valid in the world. And still, there were even some Vaishnavas who, even after seeing the writings of the Goswamis, were not satisfied. So they went to the Gaudiya Vaishnavas, the leaders, and they said, well, if you really want to be accepted, you need to give us at least we need a commentary on the Vedanta Sutra. Where's your commentary on Vedanta Sutra? You have none. Yes, we do. The Bhagavad Purana, the Srimad Bhagavatam, is the mature commentary of the Vedanta Sutra. No. You have to follow the standard that's been there for hundreds of years. Okay, Baladev, you please present this. The other Goswami said, no, I'm not going to take time to do that. Baladev, please, you do this. And what do we have? We have the Govinda Vashya. Here is our commentary on Vedanta Sutra according to Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Now you have it. Are we interested? Well, of course we're interested in what Baladev has to say. He's a Gaudiya Vaishnava. But our primary praman did not switch to the Vedanta Sutra because we wrote a commentary on it and presented it as the Gaudiya commentary. Our primary praman remains Srimad Bhagavatam. It's the mature commentary by the author itself. That is the epistemological basis of our Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition. That's what epistemology means. Does that help?
Yeah, now I can throw that word around. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Vyasadeva, Prabhupada writes in the commentary, Vyasadeva himself was dissatisfied with Vedanta Sutra. So what can the followers of Vedanta Sutra expect to find if the author himself is dissatisfied after writing it?
Very good point, of course, yes. And that was what Sri Chaitanya was. Yes. Hare Krishna. Thank you so much for your association. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Dulal.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.